Words cannot begin to describe the immense tragedy I witnessed on the afternoon of March 23, 2005. It seemed almost unfathomable that less than a year later, lightning would strike again, almost in the same place. I had just entered the kitchen with my grandmother to prepare lunch. She cried out my name as though something had happened to her. I held on to her to make sure everything was okay. As I held her tightly against me, something massive struck our house. What sounded like a bomb going off was in reality another refinery accident before the anniversary of last year's fire. I looked out my back door, but I did not see anything yet. My grandmother called to the backyard as a column of white, black, and bluish-gray smoke rose from the refinery half-mile away or so. Police cars raced to the scene, lights and sirens going. Something had gone horribly wrong at the British Petroleum refinery. Black smoke swirled away from the neighborhoods and over the other refineries as flames shot up from the fire. Dow Chemical, next door to BP, quickly sounded an alert at their refinery, and that sounded an all clear as soon as they realized it was not their refinery that was ablaze. Within 15 minutes of the explosion, as I stood in front of my grandmother's house in the corner, the community alarm sounded. That meant that anyone like myself standing outside should go in their houses. Not me, though. What others were watching on TV, I was watching live as it unfolded. News helicopters circled overhead to get a better vantage point of the drama unfolding in Texas City. The sounds of rescue vehicles filled the streets en route to render aid to those in need. A quick check of my parents' house and the neighbor's house revealed that our windows were intact. Only one of my parents' windows was shattered, but it paled in comparison to the lives that would be shattered by this tragedy. I watched as an ambulance tended to a neighbor up the road. Apparently, that person's nerves had gotten the best of her. A frantic wife stopped at my grandmother's house to use the phone to see if she could find out anything about her husband, who was working in the refinery at the time of the accident. Even as she sat there, she still had no word on what had happened to him. I never thought to ask her to call us to find out if she knew anything. Apparently, she had been working in a clinic in Dickinson, about 15 miles away, when she felt the explosion. In speaking with a TV news reporter, he had unconfirmed reports of injuries, but then something that he told me I wasn't expecting. He had been told by an official that there had been at least 4 fatalities. It didn't seem possible that in all the years these accidents had happened, anyone would actually die. The last time I had heard of anyone dying in an explosion was in May of 1978 at Texas City Refining. That time, only 7 fatalities, but still tragic nonetheless. I returned to my home and finally decided to take a rest. The fire was out. The only thing left to do was wait. News helicopters were joined by rescue helicopters airlifting the injured to the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. I watched on TV as reports of injuries steadily flowed into the newsrooms across Houston. The most seriously injured went to Galveston. Those with less severe injuries went to Texas City and Clear Lake. Then, my worst fears were confirmed during a news conference. There were fatalities, but officials didn't know until later that at least 14 were dead and 1 was missing. By that night, the only helicopters that were ahead were news choppers surveying the debris field, or were later confirmed to be office trailers, were obliterated by the blast concussion. That's where helicopters focused their cameras as rescuers sifted through debris in search of bodies. I went to bed emotionally drained and prayed that that 15th person would be found alive. By noon Wednesday, when Lord John Brown, CEO of British Petroleum, addressed the public, a company spokesman had confirmed 15 fatalities. The thing that came to my mind immediately is that 15 families would have a different Easter that year. Within 48 hours of the accident, 15 families' worst fears were confirmed. Their husbands, mothers, wives, daughters, or sons would not be coming home again. Even in the face of tragedy, many of these families showed resilience. They clung tightly to their faith, their family, their friends, and the community for support. Congregations gathered to pray for the dead and the injured. The community came together for the healing process. Never mind the speculation about the rising oil and gasoline prices. 15 people were dead, 100 were injured, at least 20 of them severely. I did not take pictures of the fire as I had in the past. That image of the smoke rising above the refinery is forever etched in my mind. The sound of the fury with the explosion slammed into our house will live with me forever. My thoughts and my prayers, even to this day, are still with the families of those victims. Even days later, it's hard to sit here and not get up every time I hear an ambulance. It's hard not to wonder if that rumbling coming from the refinery is something more than just a flare or an upset. And then as time goes on, my mind is lulled back into that sense of complacency. That thought of this tragedy will occur again is stored in the back of my mind and forgotten until it does happen again. Now, I read this about 5 days after the explosion in 2005. And I thought today, since it's the anniversary of the explosion, I would pull up this blog entry that I wrote and record it here for history, for posterity, as they say. I want to say that, even after 18 years, it's hard to forget. I look at the calendar and I try not to think about it, but 18 years later, it's still with me. And it troubles me still. And I'll never forget the sound of what I could only equate to an 18-wheeler slamming into our house that day. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next video.